My name is Caroline Waterlow, and I am a producer of documentary films, and I have loved my career working in nonfiction and telling a lot of historical stories. I grew up in Canada the first part of my childhood, and I'm an only child. I had a stay-at-home mom who was really young when she had me. She was always up for doing lots of fun things and having lots of friends over, and so I had a great childhood. My dad was in book publishing, and we always had lots of books around the house. Lots of those kind of time life books with photography and things in them, and encyclopedias and that kind of thing, and spent a lot of time pulling books off the shelf, looking at pictures and learning about history. And I guess maybe because I was an only child, my parents were able to, take me on a lot of trips, and they traveled, and they kind of took me with them everywhere. And so I would say I definitely had great opportunities as a kid to just kind of see the world, and it was full of a lot of kind of energy and activity and outings and adventures, and it was great. I loved it. My education for a lot of my life was all girls, and I'm a big believer in, maybe it's not for everybody, but for me it was great. I think it built a lot of confidence. Yeah, it was very much girl power environment, and I also went to boarding school for high school, which I think taught me a lot of independence early on. I had to make travel arrangements to go visit my, when I wanted to go home, I had to get on a plane, and when I was 14, 15, and I usually booked my own tickets and did a lot of that stuff at a pretty early age, which I think is really helpful, and just in terms of, the business of life. I learned how to sort of manage a lot of that stuff pretty early on, which when you're a producer is, I think, it's what you do a lot of logistics and organizing. So I learned that stuff early, and then for college, I wanted to be in a city. I wanted to be in an urban environment, and I had grown up in cities, and then I went to boarding school in a very rural, sort of quiet place, and I kind of wanted to get back to city action. So I went to school in Atlanta. I went to Emory University, which I loved. Pretty academic school. It was not a very sportsy school. Didn't have big football teams or that kind of environment. The thing I was most interested in was kind of research, and I loved writing papers. I was kind of a nerd, I guess. And I loved the research process of writing a paper, going into, looking at old newspapers and finding old articles and finding books in the library and all of that stuff I really enjoyed. And I also realized that all my travels and road trips with friends or just activities in Atlanta, I realized that I was kind of a documenter. I was always the friend who had the camera and took photos. This is obviously before cell phones and before everybody was carrying a camera around in their pocket. That was something that I realized after the fact that I was kind of doing all the time. Sometimes I had a dictaphone, which is like a little mini tape recorder. So a lot of times I would carry that around, and I would record audio of people. I was always a pack rat. I always kept ticket stubs and programs, and when I went places, postcards and things like that, and I would make scrapbooks and things. So I obviously had this sort of documenting gene in me somewhere, and I don't know, it took me until after college to kind of figure that out. The first big documentary project that I worked on really did shape me in a lot of ways, to know that this was the career I wanted and that I really enjoyed it, and did impact me long term, I think, in the skill set that I ultimately have. I worked on a 10-part series. The very first thing, I started as an intern and finished it several years later as like a senior associate producer. And it was a 10-hour series for PBS about the history of the American presidency. We grouped together different presidents in an episode who had a unifying theme. You start to realize when you're doing a lot of historical storytelling, that there has been a particular narrative that we've all been told, and there's actually all this other history that hasn't been given enough airtime, has not had enough exposure. So it's been interesting to live through a time where there's been a lot more awakenings about the storytelling and a lot more awareness about correcting the narrative that we've all been told, whether it's about women's history or Black history or LGBT history, whatever it might be. So that's kind of been an interesting arc. But that first series gave me a real gift in terms of the research we did. We pulled primary sources. We just transcribed letters that had never been transcribed from presidents to other presidents to other people. It gave me a real love of the history and learning how to bring it to life and not just have it be sort of portraits on walls. And how do you go back to the places where some of this history was created and find storytelling ways to tell the story, or themes to draw on, or how do you find photos that people haven't been seen? So it was both the logistics of finding the material and how you figure out interesting ways to use it to tell the story, and just confirming for me that the history and the research was really interesting and fun for me. It was a lot of hard work, but really helped me understand the filmmaking process, because I didn't go to film school and I wasn't a film major, and so there were really technical things that I just didn't know how to do, and I knew instinctually I enjoyed it and I had a good sense of story and a good sense of characters, but the physical filmmaking I really didn't have skills in. And so that project gave me an opportunity to learn all of that, and I had people who worked on that project who took me under their wing and showed me things, and that is a real gift too. I think having mentors is incredibly important. I think as women, mentors are really important. And I know there were women who along the way in different work experiences, helped me and who I could look to. There were probably two, one in particular who was really an important mentor to me, who was a director who not only gave me opportunities to do things that I hadn't done. One time we were in the middle of an interview with someone for our film, and she was doing the interview, and her name's Pamela Mason Wagner, and she was doing the interview, and in the middle of it she stood up and said, "Caroline, why don't you sit down and do the rest of the interview?" And as I had prepped, I had found the person we were going to interview, I had prepped, I had spoken to her on the phone, I had prepped Pam on it, but she just, in the middle of it, said, "Okay, you do it." And that was probably the best way to do it, because I had no build-up, I wasn't stressed, I wasn't anxious, I just sort of sat down and did it. And that's the kind of thing that's really, really important, when somebody gives you an opportunity to do something, and you may or may not succeed at it, but you got the opportunity, and you just have to sort of show your stuff, and that's really important. You can't ask for, otherwise you're in a weird place where you sort of have to ask permission to do these things, but you just kind of have to do them, but when you have a person who gives you the place to do them, is really important. So that was great. And I also really admired, she had a child and she was married and she balanced it all really well, and I was kind of fascinated by how I could see some people were really balancing it well and some people were really not balancing it well. And so I think it's something you struggle with always, and there is no such thing as balance, but there are people who somehow figure out, I don't know, how to do it better. And so I watched her a lot in terms of how she balanced her family life and her work life, and I really admired the way she did it and the way she prioritized things. So yes, I think mentors are incredibly important for support and confidence and sometimes actual opportunities. I would say, there are many social issues that I am passionate about. I think anything around women's issues, and I've always been a feminist since I was a kid, I think. I don't know that I would have necessarily named myself that, but I have some pretty strong political memories that I felt that engaged me at a pretty early age. Something like the Anita Hill trial, for example, was an incredibly formative early sort of political memory in terms of watching that play out and understanding about workplace sexual harassment. Issues around abortion rights have always engaged me. So I would say anything around women's issues I feel very connected to and care a lot about. I have a project right now that I'm developing with three other women, that is a story about an activist, a Native American activist who was murdered in the late 70s. And it's very much connected to a current day issue going on right now around murdered and missing Indigenous women. And that is maybe an example of something that I feel very engaged by and care a lot about. 3 good traits to have when you are trying to make your way in the world of production and filmmaking, documentary or otherwise. I think you have to just be tenacious. You have to absolutely be relentless in your pursuit of what you want, and unfortunately that can also mean it affects your standard of living. And you have to, you just can't give up. You just have to kind of push. I certainly know from trying to develop a couple of films in the past year and a half, the only thing that creates momentum to get these things to happen is just constant emails, constant, feedback, following up. You just have to be relentless, and you have to make people pay attention. And so I think you have to be tenacious. I think you have to be thoughtful and smart. I think you have to do your research before you contact somebody. Find out what the projects that person's done, find out where they're from, find ways to connect with people. So I think just be really kind of smart and a little bit strategic about how you contact people, how you find people, when you do find them, how you're going to connect with them. Just do your homework. I think you need to have your finger on the pulse of what's happening. And so I think, you got to read magazines, you've got to read articles, you've got to read the newspaper, you've got to be on top of sort of what's happening. Whether it's connecting with people, or whether it's being prepared for an interview, or being ready to just have ideas. Sometimes people will say to you, well, what's your dream project? Well, what are the films you like, and what are the stories you like, and why do you like them? You need to sort of understand what your own aesthetic is, and what are the things you like, and what do you care about. Everything on some level is derivative. So yeah, I think kind of just have your finger on the pulse of what's happening, and what are the things that you feel connected to, and what your opinions are about that. People are going to ask you, and you want to have good answers. Maybe the third thing is be nice to people. I never want to tell someone, particularly women, that they need to be nice and smile and all of that. I don't mean it in that sense, but I think there's a way to be a good person in this business. This might sound strange, but I don't have children, and so I do feel like there's a maternal energy I have that goes into my work a little bit, and I want people to feel supported and taken care of, and to have the tools they need to do their job, and listen to. And I think people like working with me because of that, and so I think that's something that I like. I had the great fortune and experience of being nominated for and winning an Academy Award for the documentary OJ Made in America. And really, the film won the award, and I get to be one of the people who goes on stage for it, but it was obviously an incredible team effort, and I feel like I was representing the team. And since I put the team together, that's probably my proudest thing about that, is that I feel like brought a lot of smart, great people together who made something great. We obviously had an incredible director who was a friend and colleague, Ezra Edelman. So yeah, the whole thing is just, surreal is the main, way to describe that experience. Never in a million years did I think I would be on a project that sort of had that attention and got to that place. So it was incredibly satisfying to work on something that a lot of people saw and responded to, and made a lot of conversations happen around race and domestic abuse, and a story that people thought they knew, they learned a different perspective on, with a lot of historical context. So it felt really good to be a part of a project that people seemed to really respond to. And then on the actual at the actual Oscars, I was trying really hard to keep a level head about the whole thing. I think it's really easy in Hollywood, and particularly around the Academy Awards, to kind of lose yourself a little bit. You get to go buy a fancy dress and wear a nice stylist to, help me pick out a dress. And as I was saying, 99% of the time it is not a glamorous job. And then for this kind of day, you get to be, it really does feel like Cinderella. So that was, I was trying to just stay very calm and kind of level-headed. Even though you're dressed up in a fancy dress and you're in a limo going to the awards, and then you have to talk to, you talk to reporters on the red carpet, and you do all of that kind of stuff, and you get your photo taken a lot, and you're smiling a lot. But the fact is, we were there because we made a film about murder and racial violence and a lot of really difficult subjects. And so it was a great day for us, but it's based on, something that's really intense and sad. So I wanted to keep my perspective about that. So, but you had to kind of work hard to do that in that kind of three-ring circus. My colleague, who's the director, Ezra Edelman, is a longtime friend. So to go through that experience with someone who isn't just your colleague, but is also an old friend, was really nice. So yeah, the lead up was very kind of trying to be very focused and contained, and also not be disappointed if you don't win, just be happy to be there with this great, with the nomination. And there were so many good films that year. It was a really competitive year with some great filmmakers, fellow filmmakers who I respect a lot. So it was, I was trying to just enjoy the experience for the experience with no expectation. And then, when you actually are sitting there and they're saying your film and then they announce your name, I still get like sort of I get like a little overwhelmed even just thinking about it. It's like an outer body experience basically, and you're told you don't really have very much time, so everyone says like don't kiss anyone or hug anyone, like just go because you only have about 45 seconds from the time you're announced till the time you get up there or till you're done. So by the time we were on stage, I think it was 30 seconds or 29 seconds, and there's a huge clock behind the cameras that you're staring at that's counting you down the whole time. And there's a guy with white gloves who's going like this, who's trying to make you speed up. So you're like, it's a little distracting. We had planned in advance that Ezra would speak for the film as the director, and was the person whose vision that film was, and I wanted him to speak. We talked the night before about what he would say, which is again along this line of, as a documentary person in this environment, we wanted to acknowledge what the film was about and sort of dedicate it to the people whose lives were lost in the story, both specifically in the OJ case, but also in the history of violence that we talked about, and in LA. And we wanted to acknowledge that, and I think that was the appropriate thing to do. So I feel like he did a great job. So, having worked in this industry for a while now, it's been fascinating to see the technology change and to see how differently people watch things, even in my lifetime. Certainly when you think about, people who would watch the 6 o'clock news 30 years ago. Nobody does that anymore. And news cycles have changed. The internet has obviously changed everything. And these platforms for watching now, we have so much control over what we watch. We're not limited to a certain number of networks who only have a certain amount of programming, and you have to watch the commercials. And that's how I grew up, and I did watch a lot of TV when I was growing up. I was definitely a TV kid. So yeah, it's kind of fascinating to see the trends, how they've changed, and how technology has given us all this, control over what we can choose to watch now. Certainly the documentary that we won the Academy Award for, OJ Made in America, that is not a film that could have existed prior to this kind of platform watching, because it was very long, and people tend to binge watch now, and to spend a whole weekend watching one series or one program, is not an unusual thing now. So I don't think we could have made that film 10 years ago in terms of actually having the airtime to do it. So that certainly was a benefit of this change. I think mostly it's a great change in that we can all choose what we want, but it's interesting from a pop culture point of view because we're not sharing as much of the same media, right? Everybody can be so particular, so in their niche of what whether it's music or whether it's video or film, television, like there isn't as much, we're not all watching the same thing now. And so that's kind of interesting what it does to pop culture. The best part about the on-demand platforms like Netflix, like Hulu, are certainly for documentaries, it's created a whole new life and a whole new interest in them. I think there were not that many places, certainly on television, that showed documentaries. PBS dominated mostly. HBO then sort of came in and became the sort of edgier documentary outlet, but there were not a lot of outlets, and it made it very hard to get funding for documentaries. It made it hard to make them because there just weren't as many places, and certainly not that many were put in theaters, and So people perceive them as non-money making and kind of like, oh, I know I should watch the documentary, but it's not necessarily my first choice of thing to watch. And so now documentaries have a whole other sort of life, and people are really interested in them. And they have access to documentaries at a time when news is really changing, news coverage is changing, and news, certainly newspapers and television news they don't do long form, in-depth investigative reporting the same way that they used to, because they don't have the same funds. So I think documentaries are really filling a void that people have in terms of wanting information, but they're not getting it in a lot of other places. So I think that the kind of these newer platforms for watching have been great, certainly for the part of production that I am a part of. I don't know if it counts as a guilty pleasure, but I'm obsessed with one show on PBS called Call the Midwife, which is a British period show that I absolutely love. It involves midwives, a group of midwives in London starts in the late 50s, goes into the 60s, right at a time when healthcare is really changing. But at that time, women were still giving birth at home mostly. And the women going to these homes are also almost like social workers, and they're sort of seeing the complexity of immigrant communities and different religions and different cultural norms in different homes and different families. And so it's a really interesting film. There is usually a couple of childbirths in every episode. It's not for everyone. It's a lot of screaming and yelling. My husband is very happy to not be in the room when I'm watching that show. It freaks him out completely. So I kind of love that one. And there's also a show that I think clearly I love it because it's sort of my demographic, I guess. But there's a show called Younger with Sutton Foster, who is a woman who is in her early 40s, and she's looking for a job, and she's encountering a lot of ageism. She happens to be incredibly pretty and youthful looking, so she lies about her age, and she says she's in her late 20s to get a job at a publishing company, and she's sort of fooling all these people, but she's actually a woman in her early 40s who's kind of trying to learn what it's like to be a millennial. And it's very entertaining. So that's one of my guilty pleasures. I kind of love that, and I think it's produced by Darren Star, who did Sex and the City. I kind of love that. The thing that I enjoy a lot about aging, and there's a lot to not enjoy about aging, but the thing I do enjoy about I'm 45 now, the thing I enjoy about my age now is I like having some experience under my belt. I like having some wisdom so that I feel very sure about certain opinions that I have based on experience. I enjoy the confidence that comes with age, where you just feel comfortable in your skin and you don't really care what people think about you. And I think I would tell my younger self to just care less about what people think, and it's just not something it just comes with age. It's not, and I think you also can't tell younger people to kind of savor this time in their life and enjoy the freedoms you have and enjoy the lack of the burdens that come with having a mortgage or having the things that come with life, that just are commitments that sort of, that weigh on you a little bit, that can be, that demand a lot of you. And when you don't have those when you're younger, there's such a sense of freedom that you have, and you don't realize it and you don't enjoy it at the time. So I'd probably try to tell myself to enjoy being in the moment, but mostly just kind of do your thing and just don't care what people think, and don't worry so much about what you look like, and don't worry so much about, just I don't know, all that stuff that you waste so much energy worrying about those things. So I think it's probably the main thing that people say when they're asked that question, but I would definitely just tell myself to kind of care less about what other people think. I really don't care anymore. It's really freeing. It's really great.